This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. In this episode of Roots and All, I'm joined by the incredibly inspiring Emmaline Bowman, ecological designer and waterway whisperer, to talk about her mission to heal landscapes through nature-led design at her practice, STEM Landscape Architecture and Design. We dig into the magic of restoring ecosystems, how nature-led design is possible and feasible from a business perspective, and the knock-on effects of starting the ball rolling one green space at a time.
I went on a bit of a weird journey, my background. I originally just loved aquariums. This is like as a little kid. So I used to keep a lot of fish. And when I actually finished high school, I was a manager of an aquarium. And I wanted to go to the big city, Melbourne. I grew up on a big country property, a farm down in East Gippsland. And I wanted to leave there and study bioscience and zoology in Melbourne. And so Dad was like, yeah, that's great. Get out of here. We've got I had 15 4-foot tanks at the time, just full of different types of fish.
Wow.
And, I moved to Melbourne and I could only take 2 of them with me or whatever. And studied bioscience and zoology. I was a really artistic kid. And, I loved the degree, but I was not good at physics and things like that. I liked the biology side. So I was looking into different courses and I found a course called Landscape Architecture. But my fascination has always been around biology and animals. I just love animals. So I was always an animal person before I became a plant person. Anyway, so I transferred to landscape architecture and I was still working at an aquarium during this time where I had my own business where I used to pretty much service people's fish tanks or look after their fish or help with any illnesses, or I'd set them up and create these little underwater worlds, if you would say, where I would put, different types of aquarium plants and all these different fish. And I really started to understand a fish tank is pretty much like a little underwater biome. And it translated into the environment as well. So I had this business and from there I was doing fish tanks and then it developed into ponds and then it even developed into wetlands later on. But during that time I was also at landscape architecture doing that course, which is fundamentally flawed in terms of learning and teaching children or students about plants. So basically the course was great theoretically and sort of developed interpersonal skills, but my master's was in the cohabitation of animal and human species in urban environments, because that's what I was really fascinated about was, designing spaces for people and wildlife. And basically the combination of my little business that I had with servicing aquariums, I finished my course. I worked for a couple of different companies. And then I thought, no, I really want to give this a red hot crack. I want to design spaces that we actually start to look after our environments and create spaces for us and wildlife by utilizing native plant species. And that's sort of probably a long-winded conversation there, but that's sort of the short of where I am now.
Wow, that is quite a journey. When you say that the landscape design courses are fundamentally flawed, is that because they don't factor in the animals and the habitat value of the gardens?
They don't factor in plants. It tends to be a lot more focused around architecture and theory. And practically when you get out of the course, you don't really have any knowledge about plants. So usually when we speak about this, I usually suggest, and most other people who've done the course suggest, undertaking a horticultural degree afterwards. Most of my peers, we all just learned organically, or some of them had a degree before, or just learned all by themselves that skill. So that's where I'd say it's a bit flawed.
So in your business now, do you focus on wetland habitats or ponds, or do you bring in the wider garden design sphere?
We're very multifaceted. We do deal a lot with water. So we convert a lot of dams into wetlands. And then we work right down to a little backyard garden to a balcony. You can still put in plant species that can attract pollinators. And then we were up into really big properties, whether it's a big urban block that could be nearly on an acre-sized property or rural properties. We do everything. And that's what we really love because, when you're dealing with wildlife, you're dealing with different types of species and you can cater to different types as well. Like I was saying, if you're dealing with a balcony, obviously you're not going to be getting in large mammals or anything, but you can definitely attract pollinators, different types of insects. You can even sometimes get birds. But then when you're dealing with wetlands and farmlands, you're looking at massive amounts of insect species, amphibious species. We introduced native fish species as well because our fish in Australia are in a lot of trouble because our waterways are just trashed and we have a lot of invasive species that have just destroyed those environments. So we like to introduce back the little native fish species like pygmy perch, but also, farmlands cater for mammals, kangaroos, wombat. And if you're fringing on forested areas, then you're looking at different types of marsupial species. So, yeah, we cater to everything. It doesn't matter the size, basically, and it just makes it more exciting.
I met you in Australia and I did travel around a little bit, and what struck me was the absolute enormity of your flora and fauna. And obviously you come to design with a background and expertise in your field, but do you have like a multidisciplinary team? Are you drawing on other people's expertise and people who are coming from a scientific background to make sure that you're kind of catering for all the species that might use a space?
I would say the staff are incredible. They all have their own expertise. Chili is also a landscape architect, but she's very design orientated. She's got a very fantastic native plant knowledge. But I guess with the animal side, I'm definitely the driver for all the animals and species and things like that because I've always been so drawn to that. Tom is a horticulturalist. He knows everything about plants. And, if you've got a question, he'll know it. And Laura, she came from a science background as well, which is really nice to have, designers with a science background because that is quite rare. So she's got that sort of intuitiveness to her. And she's our youngest at our grad and she's from the UK. So she comes with a really different view of things. But what she says and what we all sort of say is that if you learn these methods, you can apply it to wherever you are. So she's like already talking about, when she does end up going back home, looking into what those native plants used to be or the indigenous flora, because, I know the UK has been heavily agriculturalized. So she's sort of wanting to bring back those things to sort of see if that starts to bring back those species. Because I tell you what, when you start using indigenous species in Australia in certain areas, it's incredible what just comes. It's really exciting.
That is interesting, actually, because a lot of the people who push against the native plant or indigenous plant usage in the UK come at it and say that just because the research says that it works, say, in the States, doesn't necessarily mean you can apply that in the UK. So that is very interesting that she believes and you believe that actually those principles are applicable across the board.
Absolutely. There's still species there. Like it's probably just, the percentage of them is just heavily reduced. I mean, you look at, Great Dixter and in the way that worked in the sense of, all those species, the insect species that they found there, but they are there in limited numbers. But if you start to create these environments, you start to attract them and you increase their numbers because they've got a home to actually come to. You might also find that there's some species, being Europe, you start getting them to infiltrate back. I mean, that's the same concept that is happening here. Australia has the worst extinction in the world. It's pretty bad. And when we work on these projects and you incorporate a mixture of native and indigenous species to that area, you will find that these animals and these insects start just coming back in organically by themselves. And we are under that principle too, is that the more people that are doing it and the fact that, councils and everyone are starting to get on board, that you start to create these green wedges and that becomes corridors and pathways for these species to start to infiltrate coming back into these systems. And that's another reason why I've heavily just invested in, water ecologies. In Australia, like I said before, our water ecologies are just trashed, We have farmlands that, will have excess runoff of pollutants that come in, the invasive species like carp that have absolutely decimated the water qualities, and forestry, where logging and all this sort of thing. Like I understand that we need to have, sustainable ways of farming for food and timber and things like that. but it needs to be done in such a way that we need to be protecting our wild spaces. So then, we are protecting all the wildlife in there. And in urban environments, especially like just by planting green wedge zones, we are creating corridors. If we looked after our creek and river systems, they become easy corridors for wildlife to transpire through. It's that sort of like simple mentality. And if we did it all over the world and apply the same principle, you'll start to see just wildlife and biodiversity come back through. And, the effect for people is just so great too, because it's so rewarding. And I think most people generally just love wildlife and they want to see it. And it all comes down to being a little bit scared sometimes because they don't know what they don't know. And when it starts to happen, they sort of like get really excited. But if it's something a little bit too scary, people tend to just shun it away or don't want to try. I don't know. That's my experience.
You're very established now and your work's had a lot of coverage. How easy was it for you to kind of get client buy-in when you started out?
So it's quite interesting. I mean, I started STEM, it was about 7 years ago. And when I was working at a firm, I was always saying, like, I'd like to be able to put these native species, I want to create habitat. And I would always like have little arguments about like certain places. And I'd be like, they should be using native flora and fauna to be a bit better in the way that we're thinking about, our public spaces or in urban development and design. And I was like, well, I'm going to start my own business because I'm sick of this. I'm sick of everyone greenwashing and all that sort of stuff. So it was actually at the flower show, that Melbourne International Flower and Garden Show. I thought, you know what, I'm going to create a habitat garden and I'm going to make it beautiful because I'm going to show that these plants are beautiful, Indigenous plants and native plants. And so I created this little garden. It had a little pond. It had a little productive garden. And then I just showcased a whole lot of these beautiful native plant species from around the area. And it was pretty. And I also got like a little recording of the sounds of frogs and birds. And I tell you what, everyone was so drawn to that garden. They just thought it was just beautiful. And that's the thing I wanted to show them, is that you can have this stunning, cute garden that's for you. Like it had a little hanging bed in there for you as well. It had bug boxes. But, it also caters for wildlife. So then you can sit back, you can read a book, and as you're in there, you can hear the sounds and you can look out and there's like wildlife around you and you feel quite fulfilled and you can pick some herbs. So that was how I started. And we ended up winning like the first prize in that boutique section. And that's what catapulted the business straight away. It was like bang. And then I just think that people, they love nature. They love wildlife. Most people do. They just need to have a bit of information, free information. That's what I'm a big thing about. I'm a believer of not gatekeeping, but, give out some information. And then afterwards, because we had worked on like these larger ponds and just by chance I'd worked on this wetland and replanted all that, Gardening Australia got in contact and they did a video on the wetland there. And that was, all about creating a water habitat. It's not just a place where people can swim and things like that. It's becoming this wildlife refuge, and show different types of plant species in a water environment that flower and can look really beautiful, but, cater to frogs and dragonflies and damselflies and different types of aquatic species. So that was another thing that really made it explode. And, people, we always have work. We have the most loveliest clients. I think I always say, like, you hear horror stories from other firms, but I think our clients are just so unbelievably lovely because they are grounded in the sense that they love nature, they love wildlife, they love that curiosity of plants. So we're always really blessed to have really wonderful people, and they send pictures of all the things that come into their garden. And yeah, I mean, long story short, it was a very easy transition, and it was all just to show people that you can create beautiful spaces that can still be fully functional and attract all the critters.
Yeah, that must be amazing that you get all those pictures sent to you. That's got to be the ultimate by way of reward for the work that you do.
It is. Honestly, I get like, they're just so stunning. You get all these little micro and macro shots of even just like, the tiniest things. And that's exactly what makes me so happy, because it means that, what we've done the right job, and they've become curious, and, they're delving deeper into their garden and, seeing all these things that they hadn't even seen before. One of our best projects that we did was a rural project. Her name was Beck. She's just an incredible person. And she bought a property and she wanted to do regenerative agriculture. What she wanted to do is restore her dam. And we did it. And there's a species of frog in Australia, in Victoria, called the growling grass frog. And it's critically endangered. And, about 6 months after, we go to the property and there's growling grass frogs everywhere. We had catered the design to about accommodate these big frogs. And just lo and behold, they had moved in. And I just remember like getting that photo and just feeling that fuzzy feeling like this is exactly why I went into this and why I did it for. I have to say, I love animals. And I always usually say, like, I tend to try and privilege animals sometimes before humans sometimes. But it was that moment where I was like, oh my God, we did it. We actually got this endangered species back into something that was man-made for them. And now it's become their home. And at the same time, that dam still provided water to the livestock. The troughs where the cows would drink from, the water became crystal clear for them. We had an explosion of insect species which helped pollinate the agricultural land and all her productive gardens. And so it was like that win-win thing because, a lot of farm dams in Australia are just clay lined and the water just stays pretty foul and nothing can grow in clay in Australia except for like rushes. So to be able to bring back the philosophy that we do with our ponds and our wetlands, we introduce a silty soil and then we plant like all these local species back into it. And just by doing that, and how quickly these species grow, you can literally transform that dam from a clay infested water to this pure, clean, biologically rich, clean water and that everything and everyone can enjoy. It's so rewarding and it's so simple.
So you kind of lay the groundwork and then the land almost kind of heals itself from that point on. And like you said, it is surprising to people. And I wondered, how surprising is your work in the world of Australian landscape design? Is what you're doing quite unusual?
It was, yeah. I feel like now we've got so many great people, like you've had the lovely AB on your podcast. There are advocates in this area, but I have found that since we've started and just being a lot more vocal and actually showing as like a design firm that you can do it and have a business around it, I think that's really transformed the lens of how people see design, because now I'm seeing more and more people becoming curious and using it and advocating to look after our wildlife, and councils are doing more of it. And, we've been engaged by councils and things like that as, consultants to teach them. And, that's part of it where this change is happening because you sort of set that example. And, when I did the garden show, it was the first time that anyone had done like this habitat garden at the garden show. I was blown away when I did my master's at uni that I was the first student that had ever done a project about utilizing native plants or, trying to create environments for wildlife in urban areas. I was the first student that ever had done that, which is just mind blowing. I'm like, but what? So like, it's just that thing where if you can, just for anyone, if there's an idea you have and it can work, or you want to give it a good hot crack, do it because you set an example and people will follow. And all that it comes down to is knowledge. And if you are going to be the one that's going to try and provide that knowledge and example, then others will follow and feel like a bit more safer to do so as well. And obviously, you need to have the effect of proving that it does work, because a lot of people do sort of say those sort of things. And, sometimes it doesn't work, but knowing that it can work and you provide this beautiful service and that, go for it and teach others and don't gatekeep. That's probably my biggest thing, is get so annoyed with people who have incredible knowledge and it's almost like their own IP. So they want to keep it under their belt, but that just stops at you really. And I understand in a business perspective that sometimes you need to do certain things like that with certain things. Totally get it. But if you do have a wealth of knowledge that, you're helping the younger generation or just people who are just genuinely curious, spread the word because it's so much more powerful and we can just do so much more with that. Just a true believer of that. I've noticed in Europe, and just by the way Laura speaks about the things in Europe, that there is that thing of being a little bit afraid or even knowing what your local plant species were or are. And yeah, it would be interesting if there was more of a focus there. And like I'm asking you the question, is that something that is happening at all?
No, I don't think enough. No, I think probably when people design for wildlife, they are kind of putting in very generic things and not actually considering the wider landscape around the site where they're working. And that comes from a lack of knowledge and observation. And, I really think we need to get much better at that. And we need to start working with scientists much more, so that we can do informed design rather than just saying, oh, I'm going to plant some open flowers for pollinators. That's fine, but we need to start thinking about how the garden functions in its kind of eco-region. So yes, I think that is a problem, and that's a lack of knowledge. Well, there is a fear of getting it wrong, I suppose, but I think it's lack of knowledge mainly. So yeah, we've got a long way to go, but I think we're all kind of making strides, and that's good. And, we need to do it quickly because we haven't got the luxury of time, but hopefully we can make a difference.
And that is a key thing of disciplines merging together. It's been interesting because it's only just started to happen here, but that is a big thing that's starting to change, is the multidiscipline, just like working together. Horticulturalists or scientists sort of become consultants where people feel like they lack that knowledge. They're starting to let go of that ego and, acting like they know everything and starting to go, hang on, no, we don't. And scientists can give us such an incredible wealth of knowledge, and, we need to work together. And scientists, who are like, why aren't they doing this? Why aren't the councils and urban planners doing it like this? Well, it's because we're not interacting with each other. So, we're social creatures. So the best thing to do is get us all together and, start to get us to think collectively. And yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things that does dictate change. But yeah, it'd be interesting in Europe and England. It's all connected too. So, your wildlife can sort of infiltrate in. But yeah, it does come down to being a bit scared. It would be cool if there was a little bit more horticulturalists or botanists would just be able to like give you a selection of awesome plants that you could start to use in your garden, just like here. And then, yeah, see what happens.
Yeah, that's a really generous way of looking at it. So thank you for that. And so my final question is, you're already doing very big things and very important things. Have you got a kind of goal in mind for STEM next?
I'd love to write a book, but for STEM, I would love it to merge more onto really large scale projects where we're actually connecting corridors and, creating those wildlife refuges. I would love to be able to work with big places that are like part of like extinction projects, like trying to stop extinction and doing all those things, promoting very endangered plant life and trying to get them into the gardens. Just started to engage a lot with Cranbourne about the Raising Rarity project, where they're looking into threatened species and, bringing them into your home gardens. But yeah, for STEM, I'd just love to be able to move into those projects to really, I guess, just change perceptions in different states as well. Australia is so big, and we've done some work in Queensland and, New South Wales, and Queensland especially is just quite behind in the sense of how they think about their environments, I'm sorry to say. And yeah, like to move into those areas and to influence change in those states would be really phenomenal too. So, I mean, there's a lot of things we still want to do, like so many. And then one day I'd love to do like a garden at the flower show, showcasing more of those endangered species and things like that as well. But yeah, we'll see. Who knows? I'm also a believer of just let it naturally happen. So yeah.
Thank you very much to Emmaline for accommodating me and my rubbish grasp of time zones. Thanks also to Brent Reid of the London College of Garden Design, Melbourne, for putting us in touch initially, and to A.B. Bishop for gallantly driving me to meet Emmaline at her studio. And thanks, of course, to you for listening. You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.